What if I told you that one of the greatest civilizations in human history didn't truly die in a single moment, but slowly faded across thousands of years? A civilization that built towering pyramids without modern machines, that worshiped gods who controlled the sun, the Nile, and even death itself, and that lasted longer than most empires in human history combined. This is the story of ancient Egypt, a civilization born from a river that rose to unimaginable power and eventually collapsed under the weight of invasion, corruption, and time itself. But Egypt didn't just fall, it unraveled. To understand ancient Egypt, you must start with its lifeline, the Nile River. In a world dominated by deserts, the Nile was nothing short of miraculous. Every year, it flooded in a predictable cycle, leaving behind rich, black soil. This allowed farming to thrive in a place where survival should have been nearly impossible. The ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, meaning the Black Land, named after the fertile soil left by the floods. On both sides of the river lay the Deshret, the Red Land, empty desert that protected Egypt from invasion. This geography created something rare in ancient history: stability. While other civilizations were constantly invaded, Egypt had natural borders that made it difficult to conquer. The Mediterranean Sea to the north, deserts on both sides, and cataracts, rapids, in the south acted like natural walls. But geography alone doesn't build a civilization. It simply gives it time. And Egypt used that time better than almost anyone in history. Around 3100 BCE, something remarkable happened. King Narmer, also known as Menes, unified Upper and Lower Egypt into a single kingdom. This moment marked the beginning of dynastic rule and the birth of one of history's longest-lasting civilizations. From this point forward, Egypt would be ruled by a line of kings known as the Pharaohs. But pharaohs were not just rulers. They were believed to be living gods. In Egyptian belief, the pharaoh was the earthly embodiment of the falcon god Horus, chosen to maintain order and balance in the universe. This concept of divine kingship created extreme stability. Why? Because challenging the pharaoh wasn't just rebellion against a king. It was rebellion against the gods themselves. Early Egypt began organizing itself into powerful systems: irrigation farming along the Nile, tax collection systems, religious institutions, centralized government. The state was forming, one that would outlast entire civilizations that hadn't even been born yet. But this was only the beginning. If there's one image that defines ancient Egypt, it is the pyramids. And none are more iconic than those built during the Old Kingdom, especially the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu. This structure remains one of the most astonishing engineering feats in human history. But why build something so massive? The answer lies in Egyptian beliefs about death. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end. It was a transition. They believed in an afterlife where the soul would continue its journey. To reach it safely, the body had to be preserved through mummification and protected in elaborate tombs. The pyramids were not just tombs. They were eternal gateways. They reflected the Egyptians' obsession with order, permanence, and cosmic balance. What they called Ma'at, the principle of truth, harmony, and justice. But constructing these monuments required enormous labor and resources. Contrary to popular myth, the pyramids were not built by slaves in chains, but by skilled workers and laborers who were fed, housed, and organized by the state. Still, the Old Kingdom's power was not limitless. As pyramid construction grew more ambitious, so did the strain on resources. And slowly, cracks began to form. Around 2200 BCE, Egypt experienced its first major collapse. This period is known as the First Intermediate Period. Central authority weakened. Regional governors, known as nomarchs, began to gain more power than the pharaoh himself. But politics was only part of the problem. A sudden climate shift caused droughts and failed Nile floods. Without the river's annual gift, agriculture collapsed. Famine spread. Chaos followed. For the first time in centuries, Egypt was no longer united. The old kingdom had fallen, not through war, but through instability and environmental change. Yet, Egypt did not disappear. Instead, it adapted. After years of fragmentation, Egypt reunified during the Middle Kingdom. New pharaohs restored central authority, strengthened borders, and expanded trade. This era is often considered a classical age of Egyptian culture, balanced, stable, and prosperous. Literature, art, and architecture flourished. But Egypt had learned a painful lesson. Unity was fragile, and maintaining control required constant vigilance. To prevent another collapse, pharaohs strengthened military defenses and expanded into Nubia to secure gold resources. Egypt was becoming more organized, more structured, more controlled. But that control came at a cost, because beyond Egypt's borders, a new threat was rising. Around 1650 BCE, foreign rulers known as the Hyksos took control of northern Egypt. They introduced new technologies that would permanently change warfare in the region. Horse-drawn chariots, advanced bronze weapons, improved composite bows. Egypt was shocked. For the first time, it had been conquered. The Hyksos ruled Lower Egypt for over a century, while native Egyptian rulers controlled the south. But Egypt was not finished. Instead, it studied its conquerors, and then it struck back. The Egyptian military adopted Hyksos technology and eventually expelled them, reuniting Egypt once again. This victory led to one of the most powerful eras in Egyptian history. The New Kingdom marked Egypt's imperial age. Pharaohs were no longer just rulers of a kingdom. They were emperors of a vast empire stretching from Nubia to the Levant. Famous rulers like Ramesses II expanded Egypt's borders through military campaigns and diplomacy. Massive temples were built, including those at Karnak and Luxor. And perhaps most famously, Queen Hatshepsut rose to power as one of the most successful female rulers in ancient history. Egypt was at its peak. Wealth poured in from trade and conquest. Gold, grain, incense, and exotic goods flowed through the empire. But empires at their peak often carry the seeds of their decline, because expansion creates vulnerability, and Egypt's power was stretching further than it could sustain. As time passed, pharaohs became weaker. Priests of the god Ammonius gained enormous political power. The state became divided between religious authority and royal authority. Corruption increased. Local governors began acting independently. Egypt was no longer a unified machine. It was a fractured system pretending to be whole. And then came external pressure. New powers rose in the Mediterranean world. Trade routes shifted. Military threats increased. Egypt's borders were no longer safe. And slowly, its empire began to shrink. In 525 BCE, Egypt was conquered by the Persian Empire. Later, it fell under Greek rule after the arrival of Alexander the Great. Eventually, it became part of the Roman world. The last true Egyptian pharaoh, Cleopatra VII, tried desperately to preserve Egypt's independence. But in 30 BCE, after her defeat by Rome, ancient Egypt ceased to exist as an independent civilization. The age of the pharaohs was over. What remained was not a living empire, but a memory carved into stone. Ancient Egypt did not fall because of one war. It did not fall because of one disaster. It fell because of a combination of forces: environmental instability along the Nile, repeated cycles of fragmentation, foreign invasions and technological shifts, internal political corruption, religious and administrative power struggles. But perhaps most importantly, Egypt fell because even the most stable civilizations cannot remain unchanged forever. What made Egypt strong? Its tradition, its order, its resistance to change, eventually became what held it back. And yet, Egypt never truly disappeared. Its pyramids still stand. Its temples still whisper across the desert. Its hieroglyphs still tell stories carved thousands of years ago. Modern civilization still study its mathematics, its engineering, its religion, and its philosophy. Ancient Egypt may have collapsed, but its legacy never did. Because some civilizations don't die. They become eternal. Ancient Egypt ruled for over 3,000 years. Empires rose around it and vanished while Egypt still stood beside the Nile. Its kings believed they could defeat death itself. They built monuments meant to last forever. And in many ways, they succeeded. Because even after invasions, collapse, and the fall of the Pharaohs, the pyramids still rise from the desert. The temples still stand against time. And the story of ancient Egypt still captivates the world thousands of years later. The rise of Egypt proved how powerful civilization can become. Its collapse proved that no empire is untouchable forever, not even one built by gods. If you enjoyed this journey through the rise and ruin of ancient Egypt, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Rise and Ruin for more stories about the greatest civilizations in history and how they fell. And remember, every empire leaves behind ruins, but the greatest ones leave behind legends.